Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 34 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5. And we are going on today to chapter 20, which is titled Studying the Structure of the Universe. First of all, let us chant our prayers. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pascha Desha Tarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivasati Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindubhya eva cha, patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Right, so, studying the structure of the universe, there are 46 verses in this chapter, and we've divided them into 8 sections as follows. First section from verse 1 to verse 6, description of Plakshadweep. Second section, verse 7 to verse 12, description of Shalmali Dweep. Third section, verse 13 to verse 17, description of Kusha Dweep. Fourth section, verse 18 to verse 23, description of Kroncha Dweep. Fifth section, verse 24 to verse 28, description of Shaka Dweep. Sixth section, verse 29 to verse 34, description of Pushkara Dweep. Seventh section, verse 35 to verse 42, the position of Loka mountain. And then 8th section, verse 43 to verse 46, the position of the sun. Right. So let us get into it. First section, description of Plakshadweep, verse 1 to verse 6. Let's just have a look. Yeah, okay, so we'll do our usual program. First of all, we'll read the verses. Verse 1, the great sage Shukadev Goswami said, "Hereafter I shall describe the dimensions, characteristics, and forms of the 6 islands, beginning with the island of Plaksha." Verse 2, as Sumeru mountain is surrounded by Jambu Dweep, Jambu Dweep is also surrounded by an ocean of salt water. The breadth of Jambu Dweep is 100,000 yojanas, or 800,000 miles, and the breadth of the saltwater ocean is the same. As a moat surrounding a fort is sometimes surrounded by garden-like forest, the saltwater ocean surrounding Jambu Dweep is itself surrounded by Plakshadweep. The breadth of Plakshadweep is twice that of the saltwater ocean. In other words, 200,000 yojanas, or 1,600,000 miles. On Plakshadweep there's a tree shining like gold, and as tall as the Jambu tree on Jambu Dweep. At its root is a fire with 7 flames. It is because this tree is a Plaksha tree that the island is called Plakshadweep. Plakshadweep was governed by Idmajiva, one of the sons of Maharaj Priyavrata. He endowed the 7 islands with the names of his 7 sons, divided the islands among the sons, and then retired from active life to engage in the devotional service of the Lord. Verses 3 and 4. The 7 islands, Varshas, are named according to the names of those 7 sons: Shiva, Yavasa, Subhadra, Shanta, Shema, Amrita, and Abhaya. In those 7 tracts of land, there are 7 mountains and 7 rivers. The mountains are named Manikuta, Vrajakuta, Vajrakuta, Indrasena, Jyotishman, Suparna, Hiranyastiva, and Meghamala. And the rivers are named Aruna, Nrimna, Angirasi, Savitri, Suptabhata, Ritambara, and Satyambara. One can immediately be free from all material contamination by touching or bathing in those rivers, and the forecast of people who live in Plakshadweep, the Hansas, Patangas, Urdvayanas, and Satyangas, purify themselves in that way. The inhabitants of Plakshadweep live for 1,000 years. They are beautiful like the demigods, and they also beget children like the demigods. By completely performing the ritualistic ceremonies mentioned in the Vedas, and by worshipping the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as represented by the sun god, they attain the sun, which is a heavenly planet. Yes, okay, and on to verse 5. This is the mantra by which the inhabitants of Plakshadweep worship the Supreme Lord. So this is it. Let us take shelter of the sun god, who is a reflection of Lord Vishnu, the all-expanding Supreme Personality of Godhead, the oldest of all persons. Vishnu is the only worshipable Lord. He is the Vedas, he is religion, and he is the origin of all auspicious and inauspicious results. Now on to verse 6. O King, longevity, sensory prowess, physical and mental strength, intelligence and bravery are naturally and equally manifested in all the inhabitants of the 5 islands headed by Plakshadweep. Okay, so here we go, devotees. Description of Plakshadweep, verse 1. The great sage Shukadeva Goswami said, "Hereafter I shall describe the dimensions, characteristics, and forms of the 6 islands, beginning with the island of Plaksha." So there's no purport here. We go on to verse 2. As Sumeru mountain is surrounded by Jambu Dweep, Jambu Dweep is also surrounded by an ocean of salt water. The breadth of Jambu Dweep is 100,000 yojanas, or 800,000 miles. And the breadth of the saltwater ocean is the same. As a moat around a fort is sometimes surrounded by garden-like forest, the saltwater ocean surrounding Jambu Dweep is itself surrounded by Plakshadweep. The breadth of Plakshadweep is twice that of the saltwater ocean. In other words, 200,000 yojanas, or 1,600,000 miles. On Plakshadweep, there's a tree shining like gold, and as tall as the Jambu tree on Jambu Dweep. At its root is a fire with 7 flames. It is because this tree is a Plaksha tree that the island is called Plakshadweep. Plakshadweep was governed by Idmajiva, one of the sons of Maharaj Priyavrata. He endowed the 7 islands with the names of his 7 sons, divided the islands among the sons, and then retired from active life to engage in the devotional service of the Lord. So there's also not a purport to verse 2, So we go on to verses 3 and 4. The 7 islands, Varshas, are named according to the names of those 7 sons: Shiva, Yavasa, Subhadra, Shanta, Kshema, Amrita, and Abhaya. In those 7 tracts of land, there are 7 mountains and 7 rivers. The mountains are named Manikuta, Vajrakuta, Indrasena, Jyotishman, Suparna, Hiranyastiva, and Meghamala, and the rivers are named Aruna, Nrimna, Angirasi, Savitri, Suptabhata, Ritambara, and Satyambara. One can immediately be free from material contamination by touching or bathing in those rivers, and the forecast of people who live in Plakshadweep, the Hansas, Patangas, Urdvayanas, and Satyangas, purify themselves in that way. The inhabitants of Plakshadweep live for 1,000 years. They are beautiful like the demigods, and they also beget children like the demigods. By completely performing the ritualistic ceremonies mentioned in the Vedas, and by worshipping the Supreme Personality of Godhead as represented by the Sun God, they attain the sun, which is a heavenly planet. Okay, let's go through Srila Prabhupada's purport. It's generally understood that Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva are the 3 original deities, but many people think Vishnu is no better than Brahma and Shiva, but that's not true. The Vedas say, let us just read the translation of what the Vedas say. The Supreme Lord who acts and enjoys the results of Vedic ritualistic ceremonies, technically called Ishtapurta, who maintains the entire creation, who supplies the necessities of all living entities, and who is the central point of all creation, is Lord Vishnu. Lord Vishnu expands as the demigods known as Agni, Vayu, Surya, and Chandra, who are simply parts and parcels of his body. Right, okay, so now in Bhagavad Gita 9:23, Lord Krishna says, Yepyanya Devata Bhakta, translation, or paraphrasing perhaps, of the translation, devotees who worship the demigods with firm faith worship me also, but not according to regulative principles. So, in other words, if you worship the demigods but don't understand their relationship with Krishna, your worship is improper, it's irregular. Because Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, actually it's in the next verse. It's in the next verse, indeed. 9:24, Aham hisarva yajnanam bhoktacha prabharevacha. I am the only enjoyer of ritualistic activities. So some may argue that the demigods are as important as Lord Vishnu, as their names are different names of Vishnu. But this is not a good conclusion. Third paragraph, the Vedas say, the demigod of the moon, Chandra, came from the mind of Narayan, and the sun god came from his eyes, Narayan's eyes. The controlling deities of hearing and the life ear came from Narayan, and the controlling deity of fire was generated from his mouth. Prajapati, Lord Brahma, came from Narayan, Indra came from Narayan, and the 8 Vasus, the 11 expansions of Lord Shiva, and the 12 Adityas also came from Narayan. Fourth paragraph. Prabhupada now refers to the Smriti Vedic literature. I'll just read the translation. Brahma, Shambhu, Surya, and Indra are all merely products of the power of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is also true of the many other demigods whose names are not mentioned here. When the cosmic manifestation is annihilated, these different expansions of Narayan's potencies will merge into Narayan. In other words, all these demigods will die. Their living force will be withdrawn, and they will merge into Narayan. 5th paragraph. So the conclusion, clear conclusion is, Lord Vishnu is the Supreme Lord and not Brahma or Shiva. So an example, Prabhupada gives an example of a government officer being accepted as the whole government, although he's just a departmental manager. So therefore we should understand, everyone should, that the demigods are under Lord Vishnu. And so therefore it's said, Ekale Ishvara Krishna Arasabhabritya. There's quite a purport here, 6th paragraph. So in the next verse of Bhagavad Gita 9:25, the distinction is also expressed. Yanti Deva Vrata Devan. I'll just read the translation. Those who worship the demigods go to the planets of the demigods, whereas the worshippers of Lord Krishna and Lord Vishnu go to the planets in Vaikuntha. That's a paraphrasing. So these are standards of Smriti Shastras. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, therefore the idea that Lord Vishnu is on the same level as the demigods is in contradiction to the Shastras. The demigods are not supreme. The supremacy of the demigods is dependent on the mercy of Lord Narayan, Vishnu or Krishna. Verse 5. This is the mantra by which the inhabitants of Plakshadweep worship the Supreme Lord. So here it is. Let us take shelter of the Sun God, who is a reflection of Lord Vishnu, the all-expanding Supreme Personality of Godhead, the oldest of all persons. Vishnu is the only worshipable Lord. He is the Vedas, he is religion, and he is the origin of all auspicious and inauspicious results. So let's look at Prabhupada's purport. Prabhupada says Lord Vishnu is even the Supreme Lord of death. That's in Bhagavad Gita 10:34. Mrityu sarvaharas chaham. I am all-devouring death. So it means everything, auspicious, inauspicious, it's all controlled by Lord Vishnu. But auspicious activities, they're said to be in front of him, and inauspicious activities are behind him. So, 2nd paragraph, Prabhupada says, Madhvacharya says about this verse, I'll just read the translation. There are many lands, fields, mountains, and oceans throughout the creation, and everywhere the Supreme Personality of Godhead is worshipped by his different names. So the 3rd paragraph, Veera Raghava Acharya explains this Srimad Bhagavatam verse as follows, that the original cause of the cosmos must be the oldest person, and therefore is beyond material transformations. He is the enjoyer of all auspicious activities, and is the cause of conditional life and liberation. Surya, the demigod Surya, who is very powerful jiva, is a representation of one of the parts of the Lord's body. So we are naturally subordinate to more powerful living entities. So therefore we can worship the various demigods as powerful representatives of the Supreme Lord. So although the worship of the sun god is recommended in this mantra, he's worshipped not as the Supreme Lord, but as the powerful representative of the Lord. Fourth paragraph, Katha Upanishad 131 says, I'll just read the translation, O Nachiketa, the expansions of Lord Vishnu as the tiny living entity and the supersoul are both situated within the cave of the heart of this body. Having entered that cavity, the living entity, resting on the chief of the life ears, enjoys the results of activities, and the supersoul, acting as witness, enables him to enjoy them. Those who are well versed in knowledge of Brahman, and those householders who carefully follow the Vedic regulations, say that the difference between the two is like the difference between a shadow and the sun. Okay, that's very interesting. Verse 5, fifth paragraph rather. Prabhupada refers to Shvetashvatara Upanishad 6:16. I'll just read the translation. The Supreme Lord, the creator of this cosmic manifestation, knows every nook and corner of his creation. Although he is the cause of creation, there is no cause for his appearance. He's fully aware of everything. He is the supersoul, the master of all transcendental qualities. And he's the master of this cosmic manifestation in regard to bondage, to the conditional state of material existence, and liberation from that bondage. Sixth paragraph. Similarly, in the Taittiriya Upanishad 2:8, it is said, and again I'll just read the translation here, it is out of fear of the Supreme Brahman that the wind is blowing, out of fear of him that the sun regularly rises and sets, and out of fear of him that fire acts. It is only due to fear of him that Death and Indra, the king of heaven, perform their respective duties. And the seventh paragraph, this is really quite a big purport. So as described here, the inhabitants of the 5 islands beginning with Plakshadweep worship the sun god, the moon god, the fire god, the air god, and Lord Brahma respectively. So there are 5 deities mentioned, and the Plakshadweep inhabitants worship the sun god out of those 5, the first of the 5. But those people, the inhabitants of the 5 islands, actually worship Lord Vishnu. That's indicated in the verse by the words Pratnasya Vishnu Rupam. Vishnu is the oldest person. So Lord Vishnu is Brahma, Amrita, Mrityu, the supreme Brahman, and the origin of everything auspicious and inauspicious. Brahma, all spirituality, Amrita, nectar, Mrityu, death. And he's in everyone's heart, including the demigods. So Prabhupada refers to Bhagavad Gita chapter 7, verse 20, which says that those whose minds are distorted by material desires surrender to the demigods. And Prabhupada explores it a little further. People who are almost blind due to lusty desires are recommended to worship the demigods to fulfill their material desires. And then whatever the demigods do is done with the sanction from Lord Vishnu, with his permission, his agreement. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, people who are too lusty worship various demigods instead of worshipping Lord Vishnu, the supersoul of all living entities. But ultimately it's Lord Vishnu they worship, because he is the supersoul of all demigods. And verse 6, O king, longevity, sensory prowess, physical and mental strength, intelligence and bravery are naturally and equally manifested in all the inhabitants of the 5 islands headed by Plaksha Dweep. Okay, so section 2, verse 7 to verse 12, description of Shalmali Dweep. There are no purports to any of the verses in this section on Shalmali Dweep. So no problem, we'll just read through the verses. So, verse 7, Plaksha is surrounded by an ocean of sugarcane juice, equal in breadth to the island itself. Similarly, there is then another island, Shalmali Dweep, twice as broad as Plaksha Dweep, which is 400 yojanas or 3,200,000 miles, and surrounded by an equally broad body of water called Surasaga, the ocean that tastes like liquor. I mean, I don't know if it is liquor or just tastes like liquor, but anyway, at least it tastes like liquor. Verse 8, on Shalmali Dweep, there is a Shalmali tree, from which the island takes its name. That tree is as broad and tall as the Plaksha tree. In other words, 100 yojanas, 800 miles wide, broad, and 1,100 yojanas or 8,800 miles tall. So learned scholars say that this gigantic tree is the residence of Garuda, the chief of all the birds and the carrier of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Vishnu. So in that tree, Garuda offers Lord Vishnu his Vedic prayers. Verse 9, the son of Maharaj Priyavrata named Yagyabahu, the master of Shalmali Dweep, divided the island into 7 tracts of land which he gave to his 7 sons. The names of those divisions which correspond to the names of the sons are Surochana, Somanasya, Ramanaka, Devavarsha, Paribhadra, Apyayana, and Avigyata. Verse 10, in those tracts of land there are 7 mountains, Swarasa, Shatashringa, Vamadev, Kunda, Mukunda, Pushpavarsha, and Sahasrashruti. There are also 7 rivers, Anumati, Sunivali, Saraswati, Kuhu, Rajani, Nanda, and Raka. They're still existing. Verse 11, strictly following the cult of Varnashram Dharma, the inhabitants of those islands, who are known as Shrutidaras, Viryadaras, Vasundaras, and Ishandaras, all worship the expansion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead named Soma, the moon god. Verse 12, the inhabitants of Shalmali Dweep worship the demigod of the moon in the following words. By his own rays, the moon god has divided the month into 2 fortnights, known as Shukla and Krishna, for the distribution of food grains to the Pitas and the demigods. The demigod of the moon is he who divides time, and he is the king of all the residents of the universe. We therefore pray that he may remain our king and guide, and we offer him our respectful obeisances. So on we go to section 3 from verse 13 to verse 17, description of Kushadweep. So, okay, let's just have a look. There are a couple of purports. I think we'll just read straight through, actually, because there's a couple of short purports. Yeah. So verse 13, outside the ocean of liquor. Here, note that it's referred to as an ocean of liquor, is another island known as Kushadweep, which is 800,000 yojanas wide, twice as wide as the ocean of liquor. Anyway, it says there quite clearly, ocean of liquor. Right, as Shalmalidweep is surrounded by a liquor ocean, Kushadweep is surrounded by an ocean of liquid ghee, as broad as the island itself. On Kushadweep, there are clumps of kusha grass, from which the island takes its name. This kusha grass, which was created by the demigods by the will of the Supreme Lord, appears like a second form of fire, but with very mild and pleasing flames. Its young shoots illuminate all directions. So here there's a short purport. Let me just go quickly through it. Prabhupada makes the point that from this verse, we can guess about the nature of the flames on the moon. So like the sun, the moon must be full of flames, because without flames there can't be illumination. But the moon's flames must be mild and pleasing. So the modern theory that the moon is just full of dust, not accepted by the Bhagavatam. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, Sushaspani Sakol Malasikas Tesham Rochisha. The kusha grass illuminates all directions, but its flames are very mild and pleasing. This gives some idea of the flames existing on the moon. Verse 14. O king, another son of Maharaj Priyavrata, Hiranyareta, was the king of this island. He divided it into 7 parts, which he delivered to his 7 sons according to the rights of inheritance. The king then retired from family life to engage in austerities. The names of those sons are Vasu, Vasudana, Dhridaruchi, Stuchavrata, Nabhigupta, Vivikta, and Vamadev. Verse 15. In those 7 islands, there are 7 boundary mountains known as Chakra, Chatushringa, Kapila, Chitrakuta, Devanika, Urdhvaroma, and Dravina. There are also 7 rivers known as Ramakulya, Madhukulya, Mitravinda, Shrutavinda, Devagarbha, Kritachuta, and Mantramala. Verse 16. The inhabitants of the island of Kushadweep are celebrated as the Kushalas, Kovidas, Abhiyuktas, and Kulakas. They're like the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Sudras, respectively. By bathing in the waters of those rivers, they all become purified. They're expert in performing ritualistic ceremonies according to the orders of the Vedic scriptures. Thus they worship the Lord in his aspect as the demigod of fire. Verse 17. And this is the mantra by which the inhabitants of Kushadweep worship the fire god. O fire god, you're a part of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Hari, and you carry to him all the offerings of sacrifices. Therefore we request you to offer to the Supreme Personality of Godhead the yajnik ingredients we are offering the demigods, for the Lord is the real enjoyer. Yes, so there's a short purport here. The demigods are servants of the Lord, of course. They're like tax collectors who collect revenue and give it to the government. So demigods, they cannot accept sacrificial offerings for themselves. They just carry them to the Lord. So Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says about the spiritual master, Yasya Prasada Bhagavat Prasada. Since the Guru is a representative of the Lord, he carries to the Lord whatever is offered to him. So similarly, the demigods, as faithful servants of the Lord, hand over to him what is offered to them in sacrifices. But to think they're independent of the Lord and equal to him is called hrita jnana, a loss of intelligence. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, one who thinks that the demigods themselves are the actual benefactors is mistaken. So, section 4, verse 18 to verse 23, description of Kroncha Dweep. And let's have a look at this also. Yeah, you know what? There's just a little bit of purport. So we'll just read straight through this also. So verse 18 to verse 23. Verse 18, outside the ocean of clarified butter, ghee, is another island known as Kroncha Dweep, which has a width of 1,600,000 yojanas, or 12,800,000 miles, twice the width of the ocean of clarified butter, ghee. As Kusha Dweep is surrounded by an ocean of clarified butter, Kroncha Dweep is surrounded by an ocean of milk, as broad as the island itself. On Kroncha Dweep there's a great mountain known as Kroncha, from which the island takes its name. So, verse 19, although the vegetables living on the slopes of Mount Kroncha were attacked and devastated by the weapons of Kartikeya, the mountain has become fearless because it's always bathed on all sides by the ocean of milk and protected by Varunadev. Verse 20, the ruler of this island was another son of Maharaj Priyavrata. His name was Grita Prishta, and he was a very learned scholar. He also divided his own island among his 7 sons. After dividing the island into 7 parts, named according to the names of his sons, Grita Prishta Maharaj completely retired from family life and took shelter at the lotus feet of the Lord, the soul of all souls, who has all auspicious qualities. Thus he attained perfection. Verse 21, the sons of Maharaj Grita Prishta were named Amma, Madhuruha, Meghaprishta, Sudhama, Brajishta, Lohitarna, and Vanaspati. In their island there are 7 mountains, which indicate the boundaries of the 7 tracts of land, and there are also 7 rivers. The mountains are named Shukla, Vardhamana, Bhojana, Upabarhina, Nanda, Nandana, and Sarvatobhadra. The rivers are named Abhaya, Amritoga, Aryaka, Tirthavati, Rupavati, Pavitravati, and Shukla. Verse 22. The inhabitants of Kronchadweep are divided into 4 castes called the Purushas, Rishabhas, Dravinas, and Devikas. Using the water of those sanctified rivers, they worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead by offering a palmful of water at the lotus feet of Varuna, the demigod who has a form of water. So there's a very short purport here. Actually, it's just one sentence. I'll just read the whole thing. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, Apo Maya Asmayam, with joined palms, the inhabitants of the various sections of Kronchadweep offer the sanctified waters of the rivers to a deity made of stone or iron. Verse 23, the inhabitants of Kronchadweep worship with this mantra, O water of the rivers, you have obtained energy from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore you purify the 3 planetary systems known as Bhuloka, Bhuvaloka, and Swarloka. By your constitutional nature you take away sins, and that is why we are touching you. Kindly continue to purify us. Yes, okay. So there's another short purport, 2 paragraphs. Prabhupada refers to Bhagavad Gita, chapter 7, verse 4, Bhumi Apo Nalo Vayu, earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, false ego. Altogether, these 8 comprise my separated material energies. So the energy of the Lord is working throughout the universe, just like the sun's energy does. And the rivers mentioned in Scripture, they're also energies of the Lord, and people who bathe in them are purified. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, it can actually be seen that many people are cured of diseases simply by bathing in the Ganges. Similarly, the inhabitants of Kronchadweep purify themselves by bathing in the rivers there. Right, so, you know what we'll do, devotees? We will stop here for the day. Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.